have those. Mr. Gill, Mr. Oliver, Mr. Brissett, Mr. Lane, if you would please rise for the reading of the verdict. This is cause number F1718595-V, the State of Texas versus Roy Oliver. The verdict form reads as follows. We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant guilty of murder as charged in the indictment. Signed by the presiding juror. Mr. Janacek, is that your signature?
Yes, sir.
Members of the jury, if that is your individual verdict, if you would please signify so by raising your right hand. Please let the record reflect that all 12 members of the jury did raise their right hand. Cause number F1700576-V and F1700579. Verdict forms read as follows. F1700576. We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant not guilty. And there's a signature here. Mr. Janacek, is that your signature?
Yes, sir.
And does that signify your unanimous verdict?
Yes, sir.
Members of the jury, if that is your individual verdict, would you please signify so by raising your right hand? Let the record reflect that all 12 members of the jury raised their hand. F1700579. We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant not guilty. There's a spot here where it appears that you have your signature, Mr. Janacek.
Yes, sir.
And there's also a spot where part of it's scratched out, but you've written a note at the bottom. We, comma, the jury, unanimously find the defendant not guilty, and that's your signature too, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Members of the jury, if that's your individual verdict, would you please signify so by raising your right hand? Please let the record reflect that all, Thank you. Please let the record reflect that all 12 members of the jury did in fact raise their right hand. Mr. Oliver, Mr. Gill, Mr. Brissett, Mr. Lane, you all may be seated. It's customary in our law and our procedure to take a break at this point, so if you would please go back with the sheriffs and await further instructions. All rise for the jury.
So obviously you can see some emotion right now inside the courtroom. You know, the judge earlier in the day, Judge Birmingham, had asked that there would be no outbursts when the verdict was read, but we do know now that Roy Oliver has been found guilty of murder, one of the 3 charges in connection to the death of 15-year-old Jordan Edwards.
And Ken, we just saw Jordan Edwards' family, as you said, no outbursts, but very emotional. You could see his family embracing, a hand to the sky. They seem, at this point, we have not heard from them yet, but they seem satisfied with this guilty verdict when it comes to the murder charge, not guilty when it comes to the aggravated assault charges. This jury worked hard on this. We know that they asked the judge clarification on a question. That question continued to come up, and it was they wanted to see the testimony regarding when Roy Oliver heard the car window smash before he opened fire. So, Ken, we know this jury worked for several hours to come to this unanimous decision.
Right.
There's the DA now embracing members of the family, we assume here. They do appear satisfied with this verdict.
The judge, we heard just a moment ago, saying that the sentencing, the punishment phase in this will happen in about 15 minutes. So clearly we're going to stay on top of things for you. But right now, what you're seeing, folks, is the immediate reaction following the reading of the verdict in the Roy Oliver trial. Roy Oliver, of course, the former Balch Springs police officer charged with murder, now found guilty of murder of killing 15-year-old Jordan Edwards on that night in May 2017. The backstory here for folks who may not know it, Balch Springs police officers were called out to a house party where some teenagers were at back on that night of May 2017. At some point, there were the shots of gunfire that were heard near the party, but it didn't come from the party. That's important to point out because at that point, that's what the defense would try to paint a picture that that's sort of what heightened some of the alert with the police officers there. Former officer Roy Oliver then went for his rifle. Jordan Edwards was in a vehicle with other teenagers trying to leave the area. That's when the shots were fired, and that's when Jordan Edwards was hit with a bullet from Roy Oliver's rifle. And again, now what we're seeing here is the immediate reaction as the jury has now walked out of the room. The judge is now out of the room as well. I can't tell if Roy Oliver is still in the room or not. But again, the punishment phase of this will happen in less than 15 minutes now. But the headline right now is Roy Oliver, fired Balch Springs police officer, has now been found guilty of murder.
And Ken, Roy Oliver took the stand in his own defense. He maintained that he opened fire because he was trying to protect his partner. He said that he was trying to look out for his partner, although we did hear from that partner who also took the stand, and he testified that he at no time feared for his life. We continue to see these emotions pouring in, people in the courtroom wiping tears, embracing one another, a large show of support for the Edwards family throughout this, but especially on this day, Ken.
You know, Gilba, legal experts had sort of chimed in the past couple of days as this was wrapping up and as the jurors were taking the case for their deliberations, saying that whatever happened here was going to be very interesting because he was charged with 3 different counts. Of course, the murder charge and the 2 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon by a public servant. And so when these questions began to come out of the deliberations from the jury, it appeared that they were probably hung up on what exactly the definition of some of the use of force and what justifies a reasonable shooting. And so we know from our Steve Pickett, who's been covering this from the very beginning, that that point of what is reasonable in the eyes of the law and what is reasonable for an officer to do in a situation like this, that's what where a lot of the questions came from. We heard from expert witnesses. We heard from expert witnesses who said, you know, there was no reason to fear. Other expert witnesses who said there was no reason for him to shoot and to react in the manner that he did. And again, speaking to that point of whether it was a reasonable action that he took. Right now, though, we want to go ahead and for folks who are just joining us now, let's take a moment to listen one more time to the verdict as it was read just a couple of minutes ago.
The jury unanimously find the defendant guilty of murder as charged in the indictment. Signed by the presiding juror. Mr. Janacek, is that your signature?
Yes, sir.
Members of the jury, if that is your individual verdict, if you would please signify so by raising your right hand. Please let the record reflect that all 12 members of the jury did raise their right hand. Cause number F1700576-V and F1700579. Verdict forms read as follows. F1700576. We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant not guilty. And there's a signature here. Mr. Janacek, is that your signature?
Yes, sir.
And does that signify your unanimous verdict?
Yes, sir.
Members of the jury, if that is your individual verdict, would you please signify so by raising your right hand? Let the record reflect that all 12 members of the jury raise their hand. F1700579. We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant not guilty. There's a spot here where it appears that you have your signature, Mr. Janacek.
Yes, sir.
And there's also a spot where part of it's scratched out, but you've written a note at the bottom. We, comma, the jury, unanimously find the defendant not guilty. And that's your signature, too. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Members of the jury, if that's your individual verdict, would you please signify so by raising your right hand? Please let the record reflect that all... I'm sorry. Thank you. Please let the record reflect that all 12 members of the jury did, in fact, raise their right hand. Mr. Oliver, Mr. Gill, Mr. Brissett, Mr. Lane, you all may be seated. It's customary in our law and our procedure to take a break at this point, so if you would please go back with the sheriffs and await further instructions. All rise for the jury.
So again, that was the verdict in its entirety as it was read by the Judge Brandon Birmingham inside that Dallas County courtroom. Also in that courtroom is our Steve Pickett, who's been tweeting out some telling sort of details about what was happening in there when we talk about this reaction that we're seeing here from the family. And Steve tweeted out earlier about 4 minutes ago, hugs and tears for family of Jordan Edwards. He said they were saying, quote unquote, thank you, Jesus. That was heard just as the guilty verdict was read for Roy Oliver. We understand that the prosecution, as of just a couple of minutes ago, was asked how much time it would take for them to gather their witnesses to go into the punishment phase of all of this, and they said about 15 minutes. So by our clock, at about 2:45 or so is when we're expecting the punishment phase of this to begin. But if we can take a live look right now of inside the courtroom, what it looks like right now. Roy Oliver is I'm seeing this off to the side here. He is out of the courtroom right now, and so are many of the folks that were inside.
Once again, Roy Oliver found guilty unanimously by this verdict. Jordan Edwards' family relieved, holding on to their faith at this moment, and emotional in this courtroom as they exchanged hugs.
And important to point out that the District Attorney, Faith Johnson, has also been inside the courtroom, also offering hugs and embraces with the family as well. Folks, clearly still a lot more to be seen and to be heard inside this courtroom. It is coming up on 2:30 right now. We're going to go ahead and say goodbye for right now. We just wanted to go ahead and bring you the very latest. But as soon as something else happens, we will join you here on Facebook, as well as our newscasts throughout the day. 4, 5, 6, and of course 10 o'clock, and of course online at cbsdfw.com. We'll talk to you soon.
So we're going to shoot. Okay.